I want us to look at some of the doctrines now of the Word Faith movement. We'll begin by the doctrine of positive confession. The prosperity preachers teach that we can actually speak things into existence. Watch these clips.
Look at me, say, all of you. Say, there's power in me to speak life and death.
You call what you have. You say what you want.
And I'm here to tell you, I know that as these programs are airing, I'm speaking something into existence.
Objection! I'm speaking something into existence. If that sounds eerily like God's act of creation in Genesis 1 and 2, that's because it is. Dear ones, only God can speak things into existence. That is not something that you and I can do. The Hebrew word for create is bara. And only God baras. Only God does that. And in case you may be thinking, oh, well, they don't really mean by that what it seemed like they meant. You know, it just took them out of context. They don't actually teach that we can speak things into existence like God did, do they? Well, yeah. This is a tweet from Creflo Dollar. Take that! As spiritual beings who possess the nature of God, we have the ability to speak things into existence just like God did. Yes, they do teach this. Absolutely. And people accuse me all the time of taking these folks out of context. No, I'm not. I wouldn't want anybody to take me out of context, and I'm not doing it with them. They do teach these things. This is not an aberration. This is mainstream Word of Faith. Most of the charismatic movement, all of the Word of Faith movement, all of it. This from Joel Osteen, still dealing with positive confession. You recall the account in Luke's Gospel of the angel giving the announcement to Elizabeth of the then upcoming birth of John the Baptist. Recall this? And when her husband Zechariah heard about this, he kind of scoffed at it a little bit, remember? Because they were advanced in years. And what did God do in response to this? What did He do to Zechariah? Closed his mouth for 6 months. For a very interesting take on why God closed Zechariah's mouth, this from Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen says, why did God take away his speech? It's because God knew that Zechariah's negative words would cancel out His plan. See, God knows the power of our words. He knows that we prophesy our future, and He knew Zechariah's own negative words would stop His plan. Objection! Unbelievable. So, according to Joel Osteen, God was up in heaven looking down, and He saw Zechariah making negative confessions, and God just went into a panic. Oh my goodness, what am I ever going to do? I wasn't counting on this. And so in a last-ditch effort to save His plan of redemption, God reached down and closed His mouth and made him mute. Whew. Boy, that was a close one. No concept of the sovereignty of God. None. The prosperity gospel has no concept of the sovereignty of God. And this is not an aberration. This is mainstream. This is mainstream. The God, little g, of the prosperity gospel is a very weak, very effeminate God. It's not the God of the Bible. Take that! At the heart of the prosperity gospel Word of Faith movement is what is called the little God's doctrine. All of the faith preachers teach that if you are a Christian, you are in fact a little God. Watch this, quote-unquote, exposition of Genesis 1, 26 and 27 from Creflo Dollar. Undoubtedly the most aptly named of the prosperity preachers. But watch this. Watch this from Creflo Dollar.
In verse 26 and verse 27, God now submits Himself to this principle of everything producing after its own kind. And in verse 26 and 27, let's read it out loud. Ready? Read. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Now that's interesting, because if everything produces after its own kind, we now see God producing man. And if God now produces man, and everything produces after its own kind, if horses get together, they produce what? And if dogs get together, they produce what? If cats get together, they produce what? But if the Godhead gets together and say, let us make man, then what are they producing? They're producing gods. Now I gotta hit this thing real hard in the very beginning, because I ain't got time to go through all this. But I'm gonna say to you right now, you are gods, little g. You are gods because you came from God, and you are God. You're not just human. The only human part about you is this physical body that you live in. The real me is just like God.
Objection! The real me is just like God. Blasphemy. Blasphemy. Dear friends, when the Bible says that God created man in his image, that means that as human beings, you and I are the pinnacle of God's creation. We are the pinnacle of his creation, and we have the potential and the capacity through a saving relationship with Jesus Christ to know God. None of the other created order has that privilege and ability. I love dogs. I do. I like dogs. I really do. I grew up with black labs. Love dogs. But the greatest, smartest dog in the world will never know God, because he's not created in God's image. Cats for sure aren't. But just kidding. But just kidding, cat lovers, sort of. But we are. And I don't care what PETA says, you and I are of infinite more value than a chicken or an aardvark or platypus. We are the pinnacle of God's creation. But the Bible is very clear. There is only one God. And he is a jealous God who will not share his glory with another. He is a jealous God. And if I remember my Bible correctly, wasn't the desire to be just like God kind of what led to the whole fall thing in the first place? How ironic. The very thing, the very first temptation that led to the very first sin, led to this whole fallen, depraved state in the first place, is at the core of the Word of Faith movement. They teach you this truth, and they want you to believe it. How ironic, how dreadful ironic. Who else in the Bible wanted to be just like God? Satan. He wanted the worship that God was getting. And he rose up in rebellion against God, and it got him and a third of the angels along with him kicked out of heaven. The little God's doctrine is quite literally a doctrine of demons. And the prosperity preachers teach it as truth.